Greetings, I'm Keith Klein, the host of the VentureFizz Podcast, where I interview the most fascinating people in the tech scene. This is episode 374, and today's guest is Dave Blundin, serial entrepreneur and investor. Dave's track record is legendary as one of the top entrepreneurs and investors in the Boston tech scene. He's co-founded 23 companies, and many of which have been incredibly successful, like DataSage, which was acquired by Vignette for over $1 billion in today's dollars, EverQuote, which went public, Vestmark, which manages over $2 trillion in assets, plus companies like CourseAdvisor, Jobcase, Autotegrity, LeadKarma were all acquired. And he's invested in companies like CarGurus, TripAdvisor, plus he is the founder of Link Ventures and the startup incubator Cogo Labs. One might think that after all of this success, Dave would downshift and relax, but it is the exact opposite. He's been waiting for this moment since he was 14 years old, and that is the current platform shift to AI. He studied AI at MIT back in 1984 and pioneered quantizing neural networks as early as 1992. Needless to say, his time is now, and he believes that AI has the potential to be the greatest thing that has ever happened to humanity. He wants to savor the moment and work to train and build faster, better, and smarter AI. In this episode of our podcast, we cover lots of great topics, like Dave's background story and how his interest in AI began, the founding story of DataSage and his meeting with Jeff Bezos to land Amazon as a customer for Personalization and its acquisition by Vignette, all the details about Vestmark and its scale, building and investing in companies with Link Ventures and Cogo Labs, the story of the EverQuote IPO, AI and the importance of chip manufacturing, plus opportunities ahead with the AI platform shift, Boston's talent density and MIT's advantage, and so much more. Okay, now a brief word from our podcast sponsor, Silicon Valley Bank. I'm excited to share that this podcast is brought to you by one of the strongest longtime supporters of the local startup ecosystem, that being Silicon Valley Bank, a division of First Citizens Bank. SVB serves innovative tech, healthcare, and life sciences companies, including 60% of CNBC's Disruptor 50 list, 72% of Forbes Cloud 100 list, and 48% of Forbes AI 50 list companies. With more than 1,500 bankers and relationship advisors and $42 billion in loans through Q2 2024, SVB delivers the right people, service, and resources to support your entire financial journey. Learn more at svb.com. All right, without further ado, here's my interview with Dave. Dave, thanks so much for joining us.
My pleasure. Happy to be here.
I am so excited to talk to you. So when I started this podcast, talking to founders and investors, I had this short list of people that I wanted to interview, and you're one of them. So I was like excited to finally get some of your time, because you've done so much. And so instead of like asking you some questions to kind of kick off the conversation, I think we need to immediately go into your background story, because you've done so much. So let's go there. Where'd you grow up? What were you like as a kid? And how'd you get involved in computers?
Actually, so this is like the golden moment of my life right now. I've been waiting for AI since I was about 14 years old. But I grew up mostly overseas, actually, in the Middle East. My dad ran international in the gas turbine division for GE, one of the three biggest companies in the world. Just hilarious now, because if you look at the market cap of GE, it would be a little breakfast snack for NVIDIA. But I decided when I was 14 years old, lying in bed, I was really into aero-astro, space travel, planes, and all that stuff. But I said, you know what? I'm reading all these Marvin Minsky articles, and I 100% believe that we're going to live in the age of strong AI. It's going to happen during my lifetime, and it's going to change humanity more than anything in history by far. I mean, there's nothing even vaguely comparable to it, and I can't even vaguely contemplate a life where I'm not involved in that. So I said, you know what? I'm going to work really hard and try and go to MIT, and then try and navigate to the AI lab at MIT and figure out how all this works. So that's exactly what I did.
Okay, so for context, you were at MIT from 1984 and you graduated in 1988. So this is, this is going back, yet you were working on, your thesis was neural network simulations on a connection machine. So what does that mean?
Yeah, actually, it was an interesting time, because Marvin Minsky was, he ruled the roost, founding father of AI and all that. And he was really big on symbolic AI. And I looked at it for a year and I was like, this is just not going to work. and that's not a very popular thing to say. So I had to kind of bite my tongue. I'm just a kid, But I found Professor John Wyatt at RLE, Research Lab for Electronics, who said, you know what, I can get you on the connection machine, which is the biggest computer in the world, and you can dork around with neural nets all you want, as long as you're using it when no one else is using it. So that turned out to be basically midnight to dawn. So for 3 years, I was like, okay, if I want access to this machine and I want to see the future of neural nets, I'm going to have to become a nocturnal animal. And that's just the way it's got to be. But that worked out really, really well for me because, it had 64,000 processors. It was just this massive parallel beast. And the only way you're going to build any significant size neural net is having access to that kind of a computer, because compute was incredibly constrained back then.
So what were you building?
So backprop, the real first neural net, the backpropagation algorithm came out in '86, which is incredibly lucky timing for me because it was right in the middle of my sophomore year. I think I was probably the first person at MIT to read the paper. I was definitely the first person at MIT to code it up and try and commercialize it. I was just thoroughly convinced that intelligence has to be self-organizing. There's no way, the complexity of the human brain is just beyond imagination. And a self-organizing system has a chance, but a explicitly built system has no chance at all. So we were, or it was really just me coding up backprop algorithms, and the machines, you couldn't waste a clock cycle, so you ended up needing to code them in a assembly-like language called Paris. But it's basically assembly level code. It's very, very laborious, but you're squeezing out every conceivable clock cycle to try and build something of scale. And scale at the time was about 1 million parameter neural net, and now they're 1 trillion, going to 10 trillion parameters, just to give you a sense of how much bigger they've gotten. But at that scale, you could start to see some vertical use cases like handwriting recognition and a bunch of things like that. So that's what we built.
All right. So you graduate and I'm excited to talk about DataSage because I started recruiting in the tech industry of Boston in 1998. So I remember the company really well. But before that, you were one of the first employees at a company that a lot of people probably know about today that's been around for a while. And it was your fraternity brother that started the company?
Yeah, he was my my summer roommate, Mike Saylor. I absolutely loved all the time I got to spend with him in the fraternity. We took theories of organizations together. If there's one class you would want to take with Mike Saylor, it would be theories of organizations. He is just a broad-minded, epic kind of human being. And so the first thing I did after graduation actually is go join MicroStrategy. Wasn't there all that long, but I got to see a thriving startup really from day one through first revenue. And then later I was on the board of directors of the company after the IPO. But then came back to Boston to start DataSage right after that. But I was just at Mike's house down in Miami, 3 weeks ago, actually.
Was there a picture on LinkedIn from that?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I saw that. Yeah, that was awesome. Because, people probably know, like, I remember MicroStrategy from that 1998 era, and I think I probably purchased shares of MicroStrategy as a publicly traded company.
You still have them, I hope?
Well, no, but but I think I did all right back then. I'll take the gains when I can get them. But yeah, obviously people know them now for being smart with purchasing Bitcoin. But okay, DataSage. Okay,
Yeah.
So I'm such a Boston historian when it comes to the whole tech industry, and like there's so many things that Boston has done that has built the foundational blocks of the future, right? E-commerce and data and everything that we're seeing now, computing was foundational blocks built in Boston. And I think DataSage is one of these companies.
Yep. Yeah, no, we were one of only 3 companies in the country actually doing neural nets commercially. One was out of Brown called Nestor. One was in San Diego called HNC, Robert Neck Nielsen, and DataSage was the third. So only 3 in the country. And, there are a limited number of use cases that worked with that scale of neural net. So we started with handwriting recognition. We ended up working with a company called ScanOptics to process all the state tax forms for Texas and a bunch of other things like that, where, these are handwritten tax forms. And prior to DataSage, people would actually rekey thousands and thousands of pages of these handwritten numbers. And, massive labor savings in OCRing these things. But handwriting is tough. Now it's trivial. It's funny though, if you look at the Hugging Face open source, and you look at the library, the MNIST library, which everybody uses to benchmark their neural nets, it's the exact same data set that we used back in, I guess, 1990, 91.
It's crazy.
It is pretty crazy.
Now, did you always want to start a company? Was that something you kind of like were like, yeah, I mean, once I graduate, I'm probably gonna, start my own company?
Yeah, no doubt. I mean, you got to remember when I was growing up, we didn't have the internet, so just read magazines. And I was a huge Steve Jobs fan, and Steve Jobs, Bill Gates were duking it out for entrepreneur of all time. And that whole story was so engaging for me growing up. And it's funny. I always wanted to be Steve Jobs, but now that time has gone by, Bill Gates has done so much to save millions of lives, just malaria research alone, and it's just I actually admire both guys equally now. But my plan was to get into MIT, learn as much about AI as I could, drop out as maybe a sophomore or junior, start a company right away because those guys had dropped out. I got to MIT and one, I was having so much fun. It's just the best place on the planet. I cannot tell you. One of the things MIT does actually for the world is it brings in the brightest people who a lot of them are introverts, and it does an incredible job of making them social. It has more sports than any other school. Can you believe that? And it's not dominated by huge varsity athletes. It's super inclusive, tries to pull you into everything and get you out of your shell. And it was just the best time. I couldn't imagine a better experience for me. And then access to the supercomputers is just like icing on the cake. But yeah, I had decided I wanted to start a company as soon as I possibly could. Including before graduation. Then it was too fun. I had to stay through graduation. And then immediately I actually tried to start a company before even going to MicroStrategy, but there's no way to get funding back then. It's a different world today. There's so many incubators. Our incubator here at Cogo Labs, we pull people out of school all the time. There's like 9 teams right outside my door right now, tooling away late into the night. But there's lots and lots of pathways now for instantaneous entrepreneurship. But back then, it was much harder. So I joined MicroStrategy and then moved back to Boston to start DataSage.
All right. So how'd you get traction with DataSage?
Yeah, I got kind of the friends and family begging, pass the hat around. Got support from a couple of my uncles, which was great. Just a couple $100,000, which is enough to at least get the prototype up and running. Then we landed the Scan Optics deal. I think that was a couple $1,000,000. And then we ended up partnering with the big hardware companies, mostly Masspar. I don't know if anyone remembers Masspar, but the big ones at the time were Thinking Machines here in Cambridge with the Connection machine, which I had used at MIT. And then Masspar had a competing machine, also 16,000 processors in a box. And they needed software use cases to sell the big boxes. And they had a couple of customers they brought us into, one of which was Walmart. We also had some medical diagnosis type work through them, stock market forecasting work through them, all of which went really well. But the big eye opener for me in that was that the medical stuff is the most impactful and important for the world, and it worked incredibly well. Trying to get it to market for a startup, impossible. I mean, FDA, friction, bureaucracy. Meanwhile, working with Walmart was, aside from having to fly to Bentonville, Arkansas, because there wasn't enough data bandwidth to do any work from Cambridge. So we ended up hiring many, many people out of MIT, and everyone's flying down to Bentonville. We got a house down there to house everybody.
But how did you land Walmart? So I don't know if they still are, but at the time, the world's largest commercial database.
Yeah, actually, it was funny. The world's largest database, non-military, was it was 20 terabytes. And each terabyte unit was the size of a fridge. There were 20 of these things lined up from NCR Teradata. It was just Teradata at the time. And so, yeah, like $20 million of boxes taking up the whole floor, heating up the whole thing. It was 20 terabytes. And they had just assembled all the transactional data from all 2,000 stores, and they would beam it up by satellite and download it to the data warehouse. And so you'd have a nightly update of 20 terabytes of transactional data. And it was too much data to really analyze effectively by hand. And the first use case, they said, you guys at MIT are pretty smart. I wonder if you can predict exactly how much of every item we're going to sell at every store. So we got 2,000 stores, we got 1 million SKUs. Can you predict exactly what'll sell in each store so we get the inventory exactly right? Walmart, by the way, has this really unique process where anything that comes from a distribution center to a store has to get sold. If you don't sell it, it goes in the dumpster, or you discount it or give it away. You can't send it back. And so that forces the store managers to try and perfectly predict inventory. So it's kind of a harsh way of enforcing a very good prediction discipline. So So I think the day they turned on that system, they saved $10 or $20 million instantaneously just in inventory. And so they were overjoyed with it. So that was going really, really well, and we were starting to generate revenue traction, and we still were self-funding other than the family money at that point. Yeah, no, it was very hard to get venture money back then. It was if you look at the size of the venture capital economy in the early 1990s compared to today, just pull up the chart. I mean, it was a tiny, tiny, tiny industry, and very few of my classmates were starting companies. In fact, I was incredibly lucky that within our fraternity, Mike Saylor started MicroStrategy along with Sanju Bansal and a couple of other friends of ours. But then we ended up with something like 50 companies from the alumni of that. And just within my graduating class and 1 year older and 1 year before, there were like 20 companies that got started. So just pure luck that we had that kind of entrepreneurial density. And so we had our own kind of Silicon Valley style ecosystem just within our little friend unit. So that worked out really well.
And then Amazon.
Yeah, that was the luckiest break in venture history. So there was a guy at Walmart, Rick Dalzell, and he's kind of a big character in the Everything Store and all the other books. So if you want to study Rick Dalzell, he's a real deal. But he was kind of a gritty, super nice West Point guy, no bullshit kind of guy. And nobody ever leaves Walmart. It's like, I don't know, it's like a cult. So he calls me one day and he says, "Hey Dave, I'm not in Bentonville, Arkansas. Don't fly down there this week. I just joined a startup on the West Coast in Seattle." And I said, "Okay, what's it called?" And he said, "Well, you may not know it. It's called Amazon." I was like, "Yeah, I've heard of it." But you got to remember, nobody remembers this, but Amazon, there was a Barron's cover article called Amazon.bomb. But it basically says Amazon is completely doomed. As soon as Walmart figures out how to build a website, there's no way Amazon will be able to compete with this.
Absolutely.
And so Rick said, "Fly out to Seattle, meet Jeff Bezos. I think you're going to love each other." Jeff gave me a whole tour. It turned out that Jeff already knew Peter Diamandis, who is my other frat brother. Peter had started a club at MIT, which I think is still the biggest club at MIT, SEDS, Students for the Exploration and Development of Space. And Jeff Bezos had started SEDS at Princeton when they were both undergrads. So we already had a common friend. But anyway, Jeff is touring me around Amazon and saying, "Look, we're going to use data as our fundamental competitive weapon against the big retailers." And so the combination of neural nets and big data that's our one and only chance to win and survive. And so that turned out to be the biggest project at Amazon that year. When you look at the Amazon history, they have, for each year, the biggest thing that happened in that year. And that year, the personalization of the websites was the biggest innovation and event of the year. So we got that deal in the late 90s, right as the internet was absolutely taking off. And with Amazon as a reference customer, all the other .coms wanted to work with you. So we went from kind of slow and steady growth in 96, 97 to crazy hyper growth in 98 and 99. And that led to our liquidity event. Hired a ton of people, really built out the product for web analytics. It's called Net Customer. And then we got acquired. Actually, Amazon offered to acquire us first.
So were you like one of the first products doing personalization?
Yeah, there were two of us that I recall doing it at any scale. There was DataSage and Personify. And that's an interesting story in itself because Amazon offered to acquire us, which kind of put us in play. And then a whole bunch of other companies kind of jumped in and said, "Well, we'll pay a lot more than Amazon." And it kind of ran up. And we ended up with about a $350 million offer from Vignette, but they were also looking at Personify. And we're like, "Oh, crap, that's our one and only major competitor." And Personify was backed by big name VCs in California who were like, "No, we're holding out for $1 billion valuation." And it's funny because we ended up selling for $300 million, but the stock tripled. It was a stock for stock transaction that was liquid 4 months later, but the stock tripled during those 4 months. So we ended up with $1 billion anyway.
Right.
But Personify missed the window. The market fell apart in 2001 and then 9/11 happened. And so Personify, last time I checked on them, they were down to maybe a $50 million number from their $1 billion hopes, just because they got a little greedy at the finish line there. So, but yeah, there were only a couple of us personalizing websites. It was all the rage.
Yeah, well, Vignette was content management, like Broad Vision and FatWire, like there was all these content management applications and they were in that lane, right?
Yeah, there were three that mattered: Vignette, Interwoven, and Broadvision, all public, all with market caps around 10, 15, 20 billion. And they all call themselves content management companies, but what they were really doing is building the websites for Polo, Fidelity, E-Trade. Those are the ones that we built. These big companies all needed websites the same day. Very similar to the MicroStrategy story. This tends to happen over and over again because MicroStrategy existed right when every company needed a data warehouse and they all wanted it the same day. Then fast forward websites, everybody wanted a website. It's all the same day. So you got the content management company. Now it's all AI. Every large corporation wants AI. It's all the same day. So you get these pulses of incredible success, incredible growth. And that was one of them. There's another one right now. We'll get to that. But yeah, no, that was a golden moment, building all these websites. I was itchy to start another startup, the minute I arrived at Vignette. So I spent about, legitimately 3, 4, 5 months working hard for Vignette, and I was thinking about the next business plan almost immediately.
All right. So what did you do next? Because there's a lot, and I don't even know where it started next.
I don't know how long a podcast you want to do.
Yeah, I know. We could go all night.
Yeah, I've co-founded 23 companies over the years, and so, but the two that I was, really grinding active CEO, working the 70, 80, 90-hour weeks were DataSage, and then the next one, which was Vestmark. So Vestmark was interesting in that, one, I'm still
Represent.
there you go. Yeah, that's the one. It's on my laptop too. Yeah, I'm still the chairman, controlling shareholder. It's been growing very steadily. It now manages about $2 trillion in assets. I can give you the whole business plan if you're curious. It's not really AI.
Yeah, because I don't like Vestmark's one of these great companies. There's two things about Vestmark. One, the size scale of what it is, and I don't think people in Boston really truly recognize how big of an impact that company is. Second, the location in Wakefield is the office that I actually cut my teeth in recruiting in on Lake Quannapowitt. Yeah, 100 Lake Quannapowitt. Yeah, I used to run around that lake all the time. We were the first tenant in that building, and then obviously, yeah. So, anyways, that was a fun fact. But yeah, I definitely think people need to know the scale and complexity of what Vestmark is all about.
Yeah, so Vestmark scale, I mean, 2 trillion in assets, but also it's, last I checked, it was 14, but I think it's more like 18 million lines of code. So that was bigger than Windows NT when that was launched. I mean, this is just a massive, massive software project. And that's what I was looking for. So you got to remember the context, so in 2001, 9/11 happens. The NASDAQ peaked at 5,000, a little over 5,000. And our liquidity day on DataSage was right at the absolute top pixel, and it's like luckiest thing in the world. I mean, nobody could have timed that unless you're Warren Buffett, I guess. But so then the market came all the way down to, I think, about 1,500. So the NASDAQ. So massive implosion and not a lot of good news going on. And I was like, you know what? I want to reassemble the MIT engineering team, and I want to build something really, really sustainable, big but important, not necessarily big and important. And I started listening to earnings calls of public companies just in all sectors, trying to see like what is predictable, reliable, and sustainable. The other thing that's easy to forget is that Microsoft had about half of the market cap of all of the software industry. I mean, it was unbelievably dominant, like unstoppably dominant. And when you looked at their forecasts, they were basically going to double again. Like, well, okay, that leaves nothing. Like they will basically own all of software, and then they'll own all of tech. And that's exactly what would have happened if it wasn't for antitrust. They were really only stopped, they had bundled Internet Explorer with the operating system, and there would be no Google, there'd be no Chrome, if not for antitrust action. But I was saying, okay, I don't want to be crushed by Microsoft. What is a market that has incredibly predictable, stable earnings that isn't in Microsoft's roadmap? And so I settled on fintech. I listened to some DST earnings calls, and I'm listening to this management team say, well, we beat our earnings by a penny for the 40th consecutive quarter. Like, how do you beat your earnings? I mean, I'm exaggerating a little bit, but I mean, it was just crazy reliable. So I said, okay, I'm going to learn all about fintech, even though I know nothing about it. Ended up meeting my business partner now, Mark Cassidy. So I called my uncle Bill, who had started a company called Concord Financial. which was a fintech. And he said, yeah, there's one guy on the planet that you need to meet who knows everybody and everything in fintech. His name's Mark Cassidy. He's running Scudder Funds right now. He used to be at Concord Financial. Then he ended up running LPL Financial, and now he's my business partner here at one of our venture funds at Vestigo. But I met with Mark. He hooked me up with dozens of people to understand the fintech industry. And we said, okay, we're going to settle on a business plan where what Vestmark does fundamentally, if you look at mutual funds as an asset class, they're huge, Fidelity and everybody else. But when you look at wealthy Americans at the time, they have very little money in mutual funds. They usually use separately managed accounts because they're more tax efficient. And well, why aren't separately managed accounts offered to people with $1 million or $500,000 or $10,000 to invest? Well, it's because everybody in the account has slightly different holdings and tax basis. So your stocks are actually yours in your own account, kind of like an E-Trade account. But what that means is you can't do omnibus accounting. When you do accounting for a mutual fund, you just calculate it once for the entire fund, and then everybody just gets a pro rata fraction of either the taxes or the losses. And that's really simple. When you try and do that for every single account, Vestmark now has something like 2 to 4 million accounts that all have completely separate tax basis, holdings, lots, allocations, statements. And so at the time, automating that and getting a computer to grind through it all was barely possible at the $1 million level. But we were predicting that over time, as computers got cheaper and compute got more abundant, the account minimums would come down from $1 million to 500,000 and then they would go mainstream, and then they would be actually a huge fraction of the mutual fund industry. So we can ride that wave, and that's exactly what's happened. The separately managed account industry grew from tiny to huge, and we just rode along with it. And so now there's a couple $1 trillion on the platform.
And it's a big company, still privately held, right?
Yeah, still privately held. It just kind of grows steadily every year. And it's going to be one of the biggest beneficiaries of AI. It's already got great margins, but when you start deploying AI, because a lot of what goes on at Vestmark, and I don't want to get too deep into the gory details of financial accounting because it's not the most thrilling podcast topic ever, but there's a huge amount of code and a huge amount of things like account reconciliation, account rebalancing, like these really, kind of very white collary processes, and it's a perfect use case for AI. It's actually one of the first really, really obvious, along with coding and a few other things, one of the really obvious wins. So Vestmark's going to benefit from that tremendously. Already has, actually. Margins are way up.
I hope you are enjoying this interview. Just a brief word from our sponsor. As a longtime champion in the local startup ecosystem, Silicon Valley Bank supports innovative companies with the solutions and financing they need through every stage of growth. With more than 1,500 bankers and relationship advisors and $42 billion in loans through Q2 2024, SVB delivers the right people, service, and resources to support your entire financial journey. Learn more at svb.com. All right, so I'm trying to figure out where to go next. Okay, so because it's like, okay, now we can go Cogo Labs, which spun out lots of companies. So Cogo Labs is like an incubator is the best way to probably describe it.
Yeah. So what happened there is I was running Vestmark. Everything was going great. We're grinding it out in this, heavy duty 14 million line of code kind of world. And just by random chance, I made a seed investment through Flagship Ventures into TripAdvisor, which was co-founded by a really good friend of mine, Langley Steiner. We were both EIRs together over at Flagship, kind of hanging out, helping with the portfolio and the LPs. And so we became good buddies. And so then he left Flagship to go co-found TripAdvisor. And that turned out to be the second best deal that Flagship ever invested in, DataSage being the best, TripAdvisor right behind it. And so I bumped into Langley and Stephen Cowford, the other founder, at a Flagship Ventures event. And this is kind of 04-ish timeframe. And you remember, this is after 9/11, markets in the tank. I hadn't heard any good news. It took 15 years for the NASDAQ to get back to all-time highs. I mean, that's how bad it was. And so I bumped into the guys and I said, how's it going at Trip? And they said, it's going great. I was like, come on. No, seriously, nothing's gone great for a long time now. And they're like, no, it's really great. And they said, okay, what do you mean? They said, we're doing 40. I said, what, 40 employees? They said, no, we're doing 40 million of revenue. And we had put in, maybe $1 million, $2 million of seed money. That's it. And this thing turned profitable, and the revenues went something like 1 million, 5 million, 25, 75 in 4 years, profitably, just killing it. And so I looked at that and I said, you know what? I'm still running Vestmark, but I'm going to take the TripAdvisor business plan and I'm going to try and exactly copy it into an adjacent vertical market, not conflicting with Trip. And so we settled on CourseAdvisor. Instead of doing hotel reviews, we're going to do educational program and school reviews. And sure enough, CourseAdvisor grew even faster than TripAdvisor. So it went 730-70 in 3 years, and also only needed like $1 million of seed money.
730-70?
730-70. I mean, these are like numbers that you never see. We see them all the time right now in AI, but you didn't see these for a long time.
And how many employees? Like it wasn't a ton of employees. I know you had critical mass, but not a ton.
Yeah, between, started with 7 and then 20 and then ultimately 40, I think, something like that. So, super profitable. Yeah. Yeah, it was really, really good. And so, after CourseAdvisor did really well, I was like, okay, I'm going to give the CEO job at Vestmark, which is a full-time job, over to John Lunny, who is my number 2 and best friend. And I'm going to focus on incubation, because if this worked at TripAdvisor, it worked at CourseAdvisor, it's going to work many times in a row. And so we need to do this methodically. So that was the genesis of Link Ventures, our venture fund, and Cogo Labs, our incubator. It started really in that moment in, I guess, 2007. We incubated CourseAdvisor between 2005 and 2007. So our starting point, actually, the starting point of the venture fund is 2005, because this is our 20th anniversary right now. So it's 2005.
Right, so CourseAdvisor was acquired by the Washington Post.
Yep. Yeah, they owned Kaplan University, so it wasn't really related to the newspaper. It was related to the fact Kaplan was actually worth more than the Post. So they wanted the education reviews to go with the online university. And then I ended up consulting. That was interesting, too. I was consulting to Don Graham, the CEO of the Post, who was desperately trying to save the newspaper from the internet. And it was really fun and really sad at the same time. This is a multi-generational family empire, one of the most important sources of truth in America, and just could not be saved from the unrelenting onslaught of the internet. And, everybody knows now that, reporting and investigative news is pretty much dead, and it's really kind of sad. But it was very cool to have a ringside seat to watching them try to salvage one of the great newspapers.
All right, so you did replicate the business. So there was Autotegrity, that was car dealerships, that was acquired by ADP.
Yep.
LeadKarma, which I remember. So I came into your offices, I think at least a couple times, and I just remember seeing just dashboards everywhere of data flowing through different company screens, I think it was.
Yeah.
So each one. Oh, you still have it? Okay.
Still here, yeah. You gotta come check it out. Yep.
Okay. So I remember I was working with Akshay Patel on LeadKarma, helping him hire some people there. So that was acquired by Bankrate. But then like EverQuote, right, which is a company that people might be more familiar with in Boston. So what was the story there?
Well, so we incubated EverQuote from scratch, and I also seed invested in CarGurus. And at the time, they didn't conflict, because CarGurus was doing used cars and Autotegrity was doing new cars, but inevitably they both ended up doing all cars. Why wouldn't you? But it was a really interesting case study, because the two companies grew side by side. And we sold Autotegrity for $106 million to ADP. And Langley said, well, I'm not selling. I'm going to keep going with CarGurus. And then he said, I'm never going to be a public CEO. Why would I want all that stress and all that exposure? And then he called me one day and he said, I think I'll just take it public after all. Why not? It's like, okay, that was a change of heart. And he managed it perfectly. I mean, absolutely beautifully. And I looked at it, it got up, I think today it's maybe a 4 billion, 5 billion kind of market cap, 3, 4, 5. But I was looking at it saying, we sold for 106 million. We had a basically identical company. And Langley, just by virtue of sticking with it, ended up with a, 40x bigger outcome. And so then EverQuote came along, doing auto insurance, and not for any reason other than wanting to stick with it and not wanting to sell out every time, because we had Jobcase in there too, which we also sold out of. And these are all incredible outcomes. I mean, every one of these is like on the order of 100x return outcome. But with EverQuote, we said, no, we're going to keep going. Took it public. Just had our earnings call yesterday. You see the stock's up 25% today. Management team there has just been an absolute joy. And now we're also very, very well positioned for AI at EverQuote, which we can talk about in a minute. But the interesting thing about this story in EverQuote is it was purely a decision on, do you want to go public or do you want to get acquired? Bankrate wanted to acquire us among other people, and it's purely an emotional decision. And a lot of people don't appreciate that because, if you look back at the details of history, Google tried to sell itself to Yahoo for 300 million. The only reason Google exists today is because Yahoo said no. Facebook tried to sell itself to Microsoft for $1 billion. The only reason Facebook exists today is because Microsoft said no. And a lot of these decisions are just hanging in the balance of, do you want to take it the distance or not? And with EverQuote, we said, no, we're going to take it the distance because we can. And, and it's turned out really, really well so far.
Outside of incubating companies, how do you decide what companies to invest in?
We use, first and foremost, the Fred Wilson rule. Fred Wilson is the best performing VC of all time, kind of an unsung hero. He's also an MIT alum, absolutely brilliant, relatively quiet and private. But yeah, as he gets older, he's like, well, I've had one rule my entire life. I'll invest in any team where there are 3 or more founders, they're best friends, they write the code themselves, meaning they're in the technical details. It's a euphemism for that. They write the code themselves, and I trust them. And if they pass those 3 filters, I'll invest even if I don't like the business plan, because they end up changing the business plan 9 times out of 10 anyway. And all these other VCs get fixated on the TAM and the time to market, but it all changes. But the people don't change. And so really, really getting down and dirty on the people profiles that tend to succeed. And that best friend attribute is critical and becoming more critical, because when you get a super talented team, there's a very high chance that Google's going to come at one of those team members and say, we'll give you a $400,000 signing bonus and a $800K a year salary if you come over here right now. And that person in that moment needs to say, no way, I'm not leaving my teammates behind. We're going to build something even bigger here. And that's the number one failure mode for these early stage teams. So that trust is absolutely everything. And you got to really, really drill in on that. And it's fun. The people analytics side of it is really, really fun.
I think we covered everything in that chapter. I mean, we could go deeper on each one, but we got to talk about AI. We started talking about AI. Now it's here, So actually, so I was looking at your LinkedIn before we jumped on, and you said, okay, the 18A is here. What is that?
Oh, 18A? Yeah, this is a big deal. So I'm a, well, shouldn't give stock advice, but Intel is an incredible asset to America. It's critical. There's only 2 places that can make, sub 3 nanometer chips in the world, Intel and TSMC. And TSMC is making all the chips for NVIDIA. NVIDIA is now worth 3.5 trillion. But all of this is bottlenecked on chip manufacturing. And all of AI is bottlenecked on chip manufacturing. And people are way underappreciating how incredibly strategic and important those fabs are for everything, for global economic well-being and dominance, but also for military. And Intel's fabs absolutely 100% need to succeed. And I think Pat Gelsinger realized that, and it's incredibly expensive, like $40 or $50 billion to get those 18 angstrom, fabs to actually work. And so he had to take huge economic hits to get them to where they are today. And the investors kind of lost patience with that. But whoever inherits that CEO job next is going to have a huge benefit, from Pat taking that hit. But the government cannot let those fabs fail, and they also can't let them get acquired by TSMC, because then they're the only one vendor, and America doesn't work that way. You need at least 2 or 3 competitors in every market. And so I'm really cheering for those Intel fabs to come roaring back. I think they actually have a better technology in terms of performance than TSMC now. TSMC has a little bit of a density advantage, but they'll be pretty much neck and neck for the foreseeable future. But we need, if we were a rational country, we would take some of the $500 billion that Elon and Donald Trump are saving right now, which ultimately will be more like $2 trillion, hopefully. We would take probably, 50 to 200 billion of that and replicate those fabs, even if it took federal money, make it loans or something. But we need as much fab capacity as we can possibly make. And the other thing people are really underappreciating in the chip industry is that we're more or less at the end of Moore's law. And historically, when you built a fab, sorry, go ahead.
Well, so that was part of your LinkedIn post too.
Yeah.
So I was curious to know, like, I thought that wasn't something that would ever kind of end.
Oh God, no. I mean, you're 18 angstroms. Like an angstrom is the diameter of a hydrogen molecule. I mean,
Okay.
you're not going down much beyond 18 angstroms. You're just at the end of the atom. Um, but they actually do have a plan to get down to 14. But whatever, 18, 14 is all about the same. But that's it. That's the end of the line. And so these investments will likely be factories that last a long, long time. Because historically, every time you built a 40 nanometer, then a 10 nanometer, whatever, it would have a couple year life expectancy, but then the technology would improve. But that's behind us now. We're at the bottom, and if we build out, 5, 10 of these 18 angstrom fabs, we'll sell every chip. That's the other thing that's massively different this year versus any point in history. AI has an infinite appetite. There's literally no limit to the amount of intelligence you can create on those chips. Prior to that, if you cranked out a whole bunch more microprocessors, it wasn't clear that anyone cared, about a faster, Snapchat. It just didn't matter much. But now we're in the unconstrained AI era. The demand for chips goes to infinity, and those fabs will be running full throttle for a long, long time. So, China realizes this. The U.S. I think is kind of half realizing it, but we got to make those investments like right now because it takes like 4 years to get online, 5 years to get online. And we should sprinkle them around the country. Get a lot of states involved in it, and just run. Anyway, that's why I made the post though, because they just announced that 18 angstrom was working, and that's just remarkable. It's an incredible. It's funny, how the money in the economy doesn't always land where the innovation or the value add is, and so. If you look at Google and Google search engine, which is very similar to Alta Vista, which wasn't all that different from Lycos, built by like 40 people, 30 people. Is that really $300 billion of almost pure profit a year? Is that rational? And it's not. It's not even vaguely rational. But the chips, that 18 angstrom chip, that is one of mankind's greatest achievements. Yet the company doing it is starving. It's incredibly irrational, and there's room for some government, you know, intervention in there to make it more rational. Otherwise, the investments land in the wrong places.
Everything I continue to see and read, we're in the early innings of AI. So what's kind of like, what are you excited about right now?
I mean, I've been waiting for this moment literally my entire life. Um, I'm a huge believer that AI will be self-improving and then will accelerate like crazy. I'd be shocked if that's any later than 2029, 2030. I think there's a very real chance that it's 2025, maybe 2026. It's very soon. And there are doomsday people and then there are optimist people. It's actually impossible to predict because it comes down to what we choose to do with it. And, to the extent that our government agencies are rational, it'll be the greatest thing that ever happened to humankind. The opportunity to cure all disease, I mean, it's just the opportunity to benefit humankind is like nothing that's ever happened before. And I'm savoring the moment. I'm not going to be a doomsdayer. Like this window of time between last year and about 3 years from now, where every MIT and Harvard startup who has a computer science or engineering degree is succeeding like nothing I've ever seen before. And it's just such a golden moment for everyone around me and for what we're doing that I'm just going to savor it. I'm not going to look beyond AGI at the moment. I mean,
Well, you had all this success with Cogo Labs and the companies that you spun out from that, but now it seems like you're on the cusp of a whole different set of companies leveraging AI, and I see your portfolio is already taking shape.
yeah. Well, you got to remember, like one thing I didn't mention is I never really wanted to be rich. I had no desire to, like the things I really, really enjoy in life, like a keg in the basement with my friends or hanging out with the kids playing pickup basketball. They don't cost anything.
Yeah.
So that's what keeps me going. So why would I want money in the first place? The reason I wanted to start a company in the first place was to try and make $1 billion in order to get enough compute to train AI. This is like the whole goal.
Yeah.
So I'm still chasing that dream today. So to the extent that these companies succeed, I reinvest in other MIT and Harvard and Northeastern companies. But at the end of the day, it all rolls back into compute to train and build faster, better, smarter AI. So sticking with that life plan, see if it pans out or not, but that's the goal.
That's awesome. All right. Well, one of the companies is Liquid AI. So, what I loved about their launch was it was a show, right? Like I think sometimes Boston misses that showmanship, right? So that I mean, there was like a full-on audience, MIT presentation. So what are they working on?
Well, back to the showmanship, that's the magic of John Werner, who's one of our partners here. MIT does not do show business for, I mean, the brand is so strong, and everybody wants to be Tony Stark, or the Spider-Man and Iron Man movies did more for MIT than anything anything in history. Like, everybody wants to be there. Yeah, Tony Stark is named after Charles Stark Draper, Draper Labs right across the street here, so it's got MIT roots all over it. And a lot of the students graduating now doing their startups, when they were growing up, Iron Man 1 came out, then Iron Man 2, Iron 3. So they look at Tony Stark, and that's their role model. Like, I want to have my Jarvis AI sidekick. I want to have my company. I want to have my private jet. I want to live the Tony Stark lifestyle. And so that's been a big motivator of people to get into MIT. And now they're coming out, starting their companies in droves. We're seeing 3 times more startups coming out of MIT today than ever before, just because of that Tony Stark effect and things related to it. But MIT is terrible at showbiz, and John Werner is incredible at showbiz. So John was the orchestrator of that entire Liquid AI launch. I think the best event that ever happened in Kresge Auditorium. You got the governor on stage talking about how amazing it is. You got Daniela Rus, who runs CSAIL, doing an interview. It was just incredible. And then the team did a good job of launching it too. So Liquid AI is a foundation model completely rebuilt from scratch, more of a state space approach. It's not a transformer. Everything going on in AI right now at OpenAI, Anthropic, XAI, it's all transformers. This is a completely different approach that in the benchmarks, it has the same intelligence, but about 100 times more efficient inference speed. And what that means right now is you can embed it in any device without it needing to be connected to the internet. And so if you imagine every toaster, every phone, people are going to move off of the little kind of micro keyboard interface and over to the voice interface by the ton now that it's intelligent. Siri didn't really work out, because it hears you, but it's not intelligent. But now the intelligence is getting really, really good. And the voices are super clear and super sweet. So most devices will move over to a voice interface, very soon. But if you don't have internet connectivity, you don't want it to just fail. So you need to have the intelligence embedded in a very small form factor. So Liquid is kind of leading the way there. And they also won a bake-off to fly that F-16 fighter jet that had been modified. Every fighter jet in the U.S. Air Force now has to have a pilotless option. That's the new deal. And so if you're going to be pilotless, you may be disconnected from home base. You got to be able to fly and come back. And so that also needs to be a very, very efficient embedded neural net. So Liquid AI won that bake-off against a bunch of teams. So it's, in theory, it should completely displace transformers. We'll see if that happens, because transformers are also accelerating with all kinds of custom chips and with quantization, which we could talk about separately. So it's kind of a foot race right now, but Liquid is certainly going to win the race to the lightweight embedded model. And it's great for MIT. It's good to have foundation teams like thriving from MIT.
Yeah, so like MIT and Harvard, they're just buzzing now. So,
Yeah.
like, is Boston going to have its like? There's some naysayers out there that Boston already like lost the moment. It's already past us. Like, retention of some of these students has always been a challenge for Boston. So, what can Boston be doing better or different?
Boston historically hasn't done much to help, but the schools are so insanely dominant by themselves and getting stronger. And it's been amazing watching Northeastern become a top 20 school, and soon the guy Jay Aslam, who now is their AI czar over there, is unbelievably good. But people forget that Northeastern is 5 times bigger than MIT. It's like this massive talent pool. So between Harvard being Harvard, MIT being MIT, and now Northeastern being huge and rising fast, and BU and BC and Tufts, and Harvard, MIT, and Tufts have complete cross-registration. So from a student's point of view, it's just absolute heaven. The talent density in the Boston ecosystem is much higher than Silicon Valley. There's just many, many, many more great, talented people who can build AI startups here than there are in Silicon Valley. Now, Silicon Valley, it's funny, when you walk into a meeting Like I was at Harvard earlier today teaching a class, and AI may happen this year. It may happen soon. I'm kind of using AI in my business plan. Like, what are you talking about? You go to Stanford, and it's like
It's
no,
on.
strong AI is gone. Like, and but when you walk around Stanford, so many of the students have already left to join either OpenAI or Anthropic. You can see the disappearing computer science majors, which last I checked was maybe 16% of the student body. Over at MIT, it's almost half the student body is computer science, but then the other half is like 18C, which is math with computer science, 7C, which is biology with computer science. So it's basically 80% or more of the school is doing some form of AI and computer science. And so you go to Stanford and it's like it's been gutted. So I think what's going to benefit Boston the most in this AI revolution is just the talent pool. We just need more of those great business ideas and technical ideas to flow from Stanford back to the Boston ecosystem. And so we're doing everything we can. We poured a lot of our companies out to Silicon Valley for a week or two and bring them back, and just trying to stay as connected as we can. We're also very close to, the bigger venture funds out there. They need the deal flow, and these venture funds are now huge, like $8 billion single fund, 40 billion under management. So they really, really need the deal flow. So we're working together with them, and we need the knowledge. They need the talent and deal flow. It's a match made in heaven. So doing a lot of co-investing.
Well, your XPV website has an interesting stat that I discovered. So the impact of MIT founders. So the odds of founding a unicorn from engineering schools, MIT is, of course, number one.
Yep.
Number two is USC, University of Southern California, which I was shocked to see that. And then Stanford, third. And the numbers are actually pretty, like, much larger. Like MIT, the success of starting unicorns from the engineering school is much, much greater. It's not just kind of like a little bit. Like it's pretty compelling.
Yeah, it is compelling. I saw that stat. I put it on the XPV site, and I never had a chance to dig in and say, why is USC right up there with Stanford and MIT? And I really need to still do that. Peter Diamandis, one of my lifelong friend and one of our partners in the fund, is located in SoCal, and he knows the USC and UCLA people really, really well. So we'll get to the bottom of it. I wish I had an answer for why that's the case. But, if you look at the bottom of that chart, you see it's like, Caltech and some other great schools are less than a third of the unicorn success rate of MIT and Stanford and USC. So it's a shockingly big gap. And I attribute all of those things to ecosystem effects. You can never overestimate the importance of ecosystem. People do what their friends do or what their acquaintances do, and they're often not conscious of it. But Paul Graham has some, Y Combinator founder, has some great essays on why don't more people do startups, and they're well worth reading. But one of the points he makes in there is that the difference between calling your parents and saying you're doing a startup versus calling your parents and saying you're unemployed is about 1 millimeter. and your willingness to do that comes down to whether you have a support network around you, like-minded people telling you and encouraging you. But if you're an island, go off to some random city in the country, and you're the only person in that city doing a startup, it's devastating. And as Elon Musk says, doing a startup is like staring into the abyss and chewing on glass every day. And that's true. But if you don't have that support network cheering you on, it's just devastating. So ecosystem is everything. And I really feel like the Boston ecosystem has lagged Silicon Valley for so many years. And now just in the AI era, just really the last 2 years, absolutely skyrocketed and caught up. I think almost entirely because Silicon Valley just ran out of people. The peninsula is completely constrained. There's nowhere to go. Stanford can only grow so much. Stanford and Berkeley are nowhere near each other. Just all these constraints, these physical constraints have finally caught up, and AI needs hundreds of thousands more entrepreneurs. There's just nowhere to go. And so Boston's kind of the next logical place.
Love hearing that. No, it's an exciting time, and I'm seeing it. There's a lot of repeat founders that are building AI native startups that are uniquely qualified to solve the problem that they're working on. So it's there's a lot of good stuff going on.
Yeah.
So I don't know if you have time outside of all these things that you have going on, but when you do, what do you do with your free time?
I have a lot of hobbies, a lot of things I'm passionate about in life. Recently, almost all of them have kind of gone on the back burner just because, again, I've been waiting for this AI moment for my entire life. And it's just so fun to try and keep up with all the innovations. And I was the first guy, I think, on the planet to quantize a neural net. And now it's turning out that quantizing the transformers is a massive game changer. And so it's one of those things, again, where I could never bear not being on the forefront of it, even if I have to put everything on the back burner. But, the things I really enjoy in life, if I were to sort them, I'm the guy that snowblows the pond up in Vermont so we can play pond hockey. That's my all-time favorite activity. And, I love playing pickup basketball with the kids. Yeah, simple things in life. I don't have any really high-end needs, desires, or otherwise. Just really, really, I'm really, one conscious decision I made was to kind of stay out of the limelight, not do podcasts like this until the kids were out of the house. Just because there's a lot of problems that come up with being too high profile. But now my youngest is going to college next year, so now's the moment. So this podcast, I don't think I've ever done a podcast before.
Is this your first podcast?
As far as I know, yeah. I have to think, first real podcast anyway.
Yeah, like your whole background story. Like you've done speaking engagements, and there was another I think like an MIT or Harvard podcast where they interviewed you, but there wasn't like your background story and deep on DataSage. So thank you. I'm very privileged because I was wondering. I'm like, I've seen you being more active and seeing you are more visible in the community. So I just wasn't sure. So now I understand kind of personal.
I had an experience. That was kind of eye-opening for me when I was on the board of MicroStrategy, watching the company take off. Mike ultimately needed to get full-time security, and he still has full-time security, and he doesn't have any kids. But it's a burden. And it really makes me admire some of the things Elon Musk has done lately, because he's like standing next to the president as a bullet whizzes by is not it's not without risk. And the sacrifices he's willing to make, for no reason. He's got $200 billion, $250 billion. Like he could be sitting on a yacht doing nothing, but he's not. He's driven by the mission, and just absolutely admire that. But there's downside that comes with being in the limelight. And so the story was, I was on the board of MicroStrategy with Sanju Bansal, lifelong best friend, Mike Saylor, and Sanju was meeting with a hedge fund. And the hedge fund had some questions about the company and a few other things. And the hedge fund manager said, look, I just want to be full disclosure, start by telling you that we've had a private investigator following you and Mike and the other board members for the last 2 years, because we want to know if the board members are engaged and active and working hard on the company, and it's perfectly legal and it's part of what we do in our hedge fund. I was like, are you serious?
2 years?
This is a thing? But yeah, no, there's a lot.
Likes a lot of Italian food.
Yeah. So anyway, there's a lot of good that comes with the limelight, and then there's a lot of burden and overhead. I just wanted to wait until the kids were older and out of the house, and so now I love podcasting. I've been doing a ton of public speaking, but it's not recorded, so it's just different when it's recorded. But it's a lot of fun. I mean, really.
I'm so glad we had a chance to talk about all these stories, because I go deep on each one of them. 3 apps you can't live without, apps that you love using. Can't be your email, Slack, or your calendar.
Well, they'd be the ones at the bottom of the phone right here. So definitely ChatGPT's on that list. Actually, ChatGPT and Perplexity are duking it out. Well, chairman of a public company, so I got Ever on the stock watch here constantly. So I got my little stocks app. Can't live without that. And that actually ties into news. X has taken over. I never used Twitter. I was religiously off Twitter, and now X has completely taken over. And X and LinkedIn, actually. It seems like the circle of life now looks like it's YouTube, LinkedIn, X. kind of seems like that's the circle everyone follows. And it's interesting how, what your phone does now, you're not really sure, like, where did it come from? It's just alerts.
Yeah.
and so you end up being kind of a slave to the AI alerting system and reacting to it. And so, where you used to open an app and explicitly go somewhere, now it's just whoever's better at giving you interesting stuff just bubbles to the top. It's kind of a sign of the times in AI. Do you know the number one use case for AI is companionship?
Is it really?
Yeah. Yeah, check out one of our investments is a company called Soul.ai, XOUL.ai.
Okay.
Yeah, check it out when you get a free moment. You can make it into anything you want it to be. So if on first glance it looks a little sketchy to you or whatever, that's because that's what people made it. But you can make an Einstein best buddy, anything you want out of it. And it's worth looking at for an hour and then check in again in a month and see how much it's changed. It's mind blowing how quickly it's evolving. But it's kind of a leading indicator that there's a future world where maybe people don't interact much anymore because they're so into interacting with the AI. There's also a future world where people do interact like we're doing right now, but there's a third or fourth attendee in this podcast and they're AIs. And I'm really looking forward to this actually, because the way I'm visualizing it, and we're kind of building it outside my door here, is it's injecting interesting ideas and facts that you may have forgotten in telling a story or whatever, but it's also pulling up pictures in real time, either images from the internet or synthetic images like Mid-Journey style images that illustrate your point. And it's doing it seamlessly with no clicking, no anything. We just talk and the stuff just comes into the conversation. That technology is here today. No one's just quite figured out how to integrate it into the podcast, but I think by the end of the year.
Well, I've been blown away. So I was just used to do my podcast on Zoom, and then Riverside sent me an email like, "Hey, we're having a holiday discount, whole year discount or whatever." I'm like, "All right, I finally need to grow up and get my podcast mojo going with Riverside," and it saves me so much time. It shrunk so many different applications into one. So I wouldn't be surprised if, like, it would be cool if we were talking about DataSage, if it went to the Internet Wayback Machine archives and pulled up an old screenshot of your website, something like that. That would be like really cool. So
Yeah, yeah.
that's a great use case.
Yeah, I think it's a real threat actually to the movie industry. Because people love interacting, they love video games, they love talking, they love what we're doing right now. Um, and the idea that I would stop talking to you right now because I want to watch a movie, it's like, no, people watch movies because they got nothing else to do. But once the AI starts taking over, I think most of entertainment is going to be interactive, not passive on the couch watching. And one of the AIs right now are incredibly articulate and knowledgeable, and they can speak any language, but they're never funny. And I know exactly why they're not funny. It's going to be relatively easy to fix. But as of right now, people don't use them like in this kind of entertainment format because they're just kind of dry. But that'll be fixed this year for sure.
How about a podcast or book recommendation for entrepreneurs?
Well, the book that everyone needs to read or reread right now is Outliers, Malcolm Gladwell. The point in Outliers, this came up at Harvard today. If you look at the history of the world, there's always one thing going on that's changing everything. And it's almost never two. Sometimes it's zero. Often it's zero. But it's almost always, when there is something going on, it's one. So you got the railroads, you've got the invention of flight, you've got the invention of the computer, the PC, you've got the invention of the internet. And right now it's AI. And it's so incredibly dominant, but very few people change their life plan. We have all of these, all this momentum and all these guardrails. So I'm halfway through getting my law degree, or I'm knee deep in my 2-year stint in Madrid. Whatever it is, people don't put it on the sideline and focus on the change. But if you read Outliers, Steve Jobs, Bill Gates, born the exact same year. What are the odds? Well, they happen to be 21 when the PC comes out, which means they're not old enough to be stuck in some career track, but they're old enough to start a company. That's not coincidence. That's so rereading that book, or at least flipping through it, really gets you galvanized on, I need to be nimble. I need to let go of things that are cluttering my life or distractions and get on this bandwagon, because it's now. It's the most urgent thing you'll ever experience. So Outliers is definitely the book I would pick up. Then the podcast, no doubt, Dwarkesh interviewing Leopold Aschenbrunner, which is a 4.5 hour long podcast. And I was like, I can't listen to that. It was the best piece of media I've ever seen in my life. I listened to it. I tried to listen to it in fast speed. And I said, you know what? I'm going to listen to this again at regular speed. Holy crap, is that packed with absolutely brilliant insights. So yeah, highly, highly recommend it. And just, don't watch 2 movies. Instead, watch that thing end to end. Also, if you're poking around the internet, Dylan Patel, man, he came out of nowhere. Just look him up. He's
Okay.
he understands the full stack of what's going on in AI. We need people right now that really understand, starting from the AI vertical use case through the transformer algorithm down to the chip level and the data center level. And, in the last 20 years, software, cloud is up here, software is up here, software is eating the world. You don't have to worry too much about the hardware, and then the hardware is down there and some data. You don't have to think about that. So everything kind of got cut, all this knowledge got cut horizontally. And it happened within MIT too. At MIT, you used to learn about transistors, circuits, software, all in one class or all in one degree. And then they later cut it up into 6.4 is for AI, 6.3 is for software, 6.1 is for hardware, 6.2 is a hybrid. So they cut it all up that way. Now with AI, every time there's an algorithm change, there's a new use case that just blows your mind. And there's also a new chip design that runs it 100 times faster. And so people who can visualize the stack this way, like Dylan Patel, are really rare, and we need a lot more of them. So I'm coaching a lot of the MIT students out here to just really go do some VLSI design, understand how the circuits work, understand how it gets deployed at scale in a data center, and then from there you'll be able to predict a use case that literally wouldn't have worked a week ago, but will work perfectly next week. And if you can predict those use cases, then you'll win the race to market in those new openings. And there's so many of them right now.
Well, Dave, thanks so much for taking the time to walk us through your background story. Obviously, all the great work you've done as an investor and company builder, and obviously all the great advice and work that you're doing to, further AI.
It's been an absolute pleasure. Thanks for having me on. And get to lots and lots of views. That's good for all of us.
Sounds good.
All right. Have a good night.